Right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler, and we're here to talk all things Challenge Cup, Martyn.
And other things as well, of course. But yeah, the Challenge Cup's the main thing, obviously, today, because it was an amazing game at Wembley on Saturday. I was delighted to be there in the press box, and it was an absolute thriller. And it demonstrated, Jake, the old truism that great sport tends to be when two teams are very evenly matched and you don't know the outcome until virtually the end of the contest. And certainly that was true on Saturday. I mean, everybody has pointed out really that Warrington were probably the better side, and they were. And the funny thing was that as the second half unfolded, I got the feeling watching the game that Warrington were exerting their dominance more and more. So it was quite a surprise when eventually they couldn't hold on. And, it was an incredible... I actually wrote about the game in the sense that Hull KR probably needed that win, probably even more than Warrington did, in a sense, because there'd been so much publicity about them not having won the Cup since 1980 when they beat Hull FC, and not won a major trophy since 1985 when they were the champions in the old winter season of 84-85. And they had a bigger bunch of supporters at Wembley than Warrington had. Anything between 15 and 20,000, I think, were there. They were an incredible sight at the end of the stadium, and they made a load of noise. But as the second half unfolded, they gradually became quieter, because I think it dawned on quite a lot of them that they were probably not going to win the game. And when they did, it was actually a surprise to everybody, including their fans, and I'm sure it was a surprise to Willie Peters in the end that they managed to pull it off. But the emotional scenes were actually quite moving, I thought. You know, they clearly it's a strange mixture when you win a game like that, Jake. It's a strange mixture of elation on the one hand and just relief on the other, and obviously the elation comes first, but there's also that relief that they've finally done it. They've got the monkey off the back. Nobody can say to them anymore that they haven't won a major trophy in recent years. They've now got one, and they can go forward and, with a bit of luck, win more trophies, obviously including the Super League title this year. They've got the ability to do it, but my goodness, it was a close thing. And you saw the highlights. You've not seen the whole game. What did you make of it?
Oh, mate, like I said, it's always hard to gauge from the highlights, but a few things you touched on there, just the scenes, the emotion on the players after the match, like seeing Mikey Lewis fall to his knees, I'm going to say on the brink of tears. It looked like he was getting quite emotional.
Oh, he was. Yes.
Yeah, seeing like Warrior Hargraves cuddling Willie Peters after the match. You know, what an experience for him being able to play at Wembley at the end of his season, at the end of his career rather, and to win a Challenge Cup. You know, that's something that a lot of NRL players, you know, don't get to play in, let alone win. So it was great to see him achieve that.
Well, that game alone will make him very happy to have come to England, won't it? That just, you know, if he achieves nothing else this year with Hull KR, that game alone and winning the cup in front of that audience and on national TV and so on will make it all worthwhile. You can't emphasise that sufficiently, really, that it just means so much. And the Challenge Cup, I've written about it obviously in League Express this week, and I've made the point that Wembley is the worst place in the world to lose a game. There's no other place like it, and you saw it with Warrington, didn't you? You saw the absolute devastation on the faces of the Warrington players at the end, and it wasn't just that they'd lost the game in the last couple of minutes, but it was, you know, the whole idea they've lost again at Wembley, and they lost last year, of course, to Wigan. Last year's performance against Wigan was a poor performance compared to this one. They were far better organised this year than they were in 2024, but nonetheless the result was the same ultimately. And they were... Mark Sneyd won the Landstod Trophy, for example, but to be quite frank, I mean, he's one of the relatively small number of players who have won it on a losing side. But immediately after the game, it didn't mean much to him, I'm afraid, because the team had lost. And you could see that I mean, he's a mature player. He's done so many. It's the third time he's won the Landstod Trophy, incidentally. Only Sean Long has done that before he did. But nonetheless, it just didn't make up for the defeat, and nothing could do. And the Wolves, the Warrington players, will have to go and somehow recover from that incredible disappointment. And, no doubt they will, but it will be a difficult week for them this week, I think. And they've somehow got to regroup. They've lost Matt Duffy, who's got a broken cheekbone and went off for the last 10 minutes or so, allowing Stefan Ratchford onto the pitch for the last 9 or 10 minutes of the game. That was the only part of the game in which he played. But, it just didn't... It looked for so long as though they were going to win it. And at the end of the day, they just... Hull KR had one chance, and Hull KR took that chance right at the end, and it was amazing. And Tom Davis, the guy who scored the try, did it because he was just following up that kick, and he was determined to get to the ball first. Aaron Lindop couldn't ground it, and Tom Davis did. And when the referee stood by the dead ball line and gave the try sign, the Hull KR fans cheered themselves hoarse, and that was before the video referee had actually given the final decision. And then, of course, it all came down to a dramatic conversion attempt by Mikey Lewis, and that young man obviously needed nerves of steel, didn't he, to get that ball over. And interestingly enough, Willie Peters was saying that Mikey Lewis doesn't practice goal kicking that much. He prefers to just let it come naturally. Too much practicing probably makes a player a bit nervous, or in his case it would have made him nervous. But so instead he didn't have much practice time prior to the game, but knocked it over absolutely brilliantly. And again, the Hull KR fans were absolutely ecstatic. It was that change from being in the depths of despair to the heights of absolute ecstasy when that goal kick went over, and it was extraordinary. And I had to come back via the train to Yorkshire, and in King's Cross Station there were all KR fans, I think, celebrating wildly and still not quite believing what they'd achieved. And it was great to see. Actually, they were incredibly vociferous, but very well behaved as far as I could tell, anyway. But just it was an amazing day. And as a final point on Wembley, anybody who is connected with rugby league who says we ought to take the Challenge Cup final away from Wembley, I will volunteer to shoot them personally, Jake, because Wembley is where the Challenge Cup final belongs, and I know we only had 63,000 people or so there in a 90,000 stadium, and we've got to find ways of filling that stadium for such. If that stadium had been full for such a great game, it would have been even better, obviously. And we need to get back to that situation where we can fill the stadium. But nonetheless, Wembley is such an emotional place that the game couldn't be the same anywhere else, I'm afraid. And whatever we do, I know our contract with Wembley, I think, expires in 2027, but we've got to stay there. the idea that it could be, we could put it at a football ground elsewhere or somewhere in the north of England is just absolutely a non-starter as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, just listening to it, watching the highlights back, it seemed like that the whole KR fan just really got vocal in that last 10 minutes, especially when the Rovers were attacking the try line. But as you touched on, 63,000, the noise that was coming through my speakers, it sounded like a crowd of 90,000.
Oh, yeah.
So
it was the best atmosphere at a Challenge Cup final I've seen for quite some time, actually. I think both sets of supporters deserve enormous credit. Warrington, as I say, I think was slightly outnumbered, but nonetheless they gave great support to their team. And of course, for most of the game, they were winning, weren't they? So obviously they would give great support to their side, but or at least for most of the second half. They scored fairly late in the first half, but with quite an interesting try, young Josh Thewlis touching down when a kick from Sneed was rebounded off Jez Litton's foot, and the whole KR defence were wrong-footed by that, and young Thewlis took advantage. But no, it was absolutely amazing, and as I say, it set a real standard for future Challenge Cup finals to live up to, I think, as that one.
Oh, definitely. And I think for Warrington, though, there's still a lot of positives they can take out of that performance. Obviously, that they've been a little bit up and down over the past month or so. Do you think Sam Burgess is coming out of that game thinking, all right, we can still mix it with the top teams in this competition?
Well, when I said to Sam after the game in the press conference that obviously it's tremendously disappointing to lose, and I think most people thought that on the balance of play, Warrington were the slightly better team. And even Willie Peters probably, he did concede that point. But of course, that makes no difference to the final result. But I said to Sam, the key thing in the match, and the reason why Warrington probably were the dominant side, was because of Mark Sneed's brilliant kicking game. And of course, Warrington have only fairly recently recruited Mark, and he is, that recruitment of Mark, in my opinion, is a masterstroke. His combination with George Williams will continue to develop. It's worth bearing in mind that that was the first time, I think it was the first time he's played with George Williams at halfback, because George Williams came back from a very lengthy injury absence. So that combination is going to grow and grow, isn't it? And who knows how far it could take them. Warrington are, if we look at the table now, Warrington are just 2 points outside the top six. So they've got plenty of scope for, improvement and getting into the six. And I think with Sneed and Williams as their halfback pair, together with a very willing bunch of forwards, I think they've got what it takes to get into the six. I'm not quite sure who would make way for them, having said that, because there are 8 very good sides in Super League this year and only 6 places available. So if Warrington do make it, somebody else has got to give way, and as I say, I'm not absolutely sure who that is. And this weekend they will take on Leeds Rhinos at Headingley, so that's not an easy job for them on the rebound from a Challenge Cup final defeat. But nonetheless, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else impress you, mate, being there at the grounds? Like, were there any other standout players that you thought deserved some recognition?
Oh, I thought there were. Well, I don't think any player played badly. Put it that way. But I was very impressed by Jack Broadbent at fullback for Hull KR. He was subjected to a kicking barrage from Mark Sneed. I think Sneed kicked the ball 25 times in play, which is roughly one kick every 3 minutes, and a lot of them went in the direction of Jack Broadbent at fullback, and he handled them very well. I think he's a really accomplished player, and interesting that they've got Arthur Morg, who couldn't play in the Challenge Cup final because he'd been cup-tied, having played in the Cup with Catalans. So when he comes back, I dare say that Jack Broadbent will move into the centre, because they had James Batchelor, who's normally a second-row forward, playing in the centre for them at Wembley. And I think if they had Morg at full-back and Broadbent at centre, I think that would be a really dangerous situation for their opponents. And I really like young Broadbent, but I think there were so many other players. I was really pleased to see the way that Dean Hadley played as well. Dean Hadley, he missed the previous game, if you recall, because they were a bit worried about him picking up a minor sort of suspension that might have kept him out of the game if he'd been unlucky enough to be involved in an incident with a St Helens player in the previous game. But he was on the field, as I say, for 80 minutes. Was Dean, and he made a massive contribution to their success. I'm just trying to see how many tackles he actually made, but 53 tackles altogether. 53 tackles in 80 minutes without a rest, which shows how vital. He's one of the most underrated players in the game, and I do hope that Sean Wayne, the England coach, well, obviously Sean Wayne will have been watching the game, but I do hope that he noticed how good Dean Hadley was in that game, because I thought he was absolutely outstanding. And to play like that for 80 minutes without a break is a great achievement in my view.
No, absolutely, mate. Now, let's say 63,000 in attendance. Do you think that's a success from the RFL? I think we were sort of predicting maybe 60,000.
Well, it's not a failure. I mean, success would be to fill the stadium, wouldn't it? I know that's maybe too ambitious given the current state of rugby league, but nonetheless they've got to find ways of filling the stadium, and I don't think we can regard any crowd as a great success until we actually get much nearer to that objective. The Challenge Cup does seem to now draw fans mainly from the two competing teams, with not many fans from other teams coming. That's been the case for several years now, and we've got to find ways of getting more fans here. And it's difficult to know how the RFL or RL Commercial is going to do that, Jake. But they've got to find a way. And one thing that slightly surprised me about the events on the day, we've got the first test of the Ashes series at Wembley on the 25th of October. You might have thought, therefore, that it would be a good idea to give everybody coming into the ground on Saturday a leaflet with details of how to buy tickets for that game. Because you've got, it's not just a case of selling Wembley for the cup final. We've got to fill it for the Australian Test match as well, and obviously I hope we do. But really, on Saturday we had 63,000 people there, a captive audience really, and they could have been given a reminder of how to buy tickets with a QR code, for example, on a leaflet. Linking them to the ticket buying site, maybe giving people who attended the Challenge Cup final a small discount on tickets, something like that, something that would have encouraged maybe 10,000 of them to who haven't already bought tickets for the Test match to dip their hands in their pockets again. But it wasn't there, and it was a missed opportunity as far as I was concerned.
No, I agree, mate. And I was just as you were talking, then I thought it'd be nice if they could do a QR code with a discount, 5 or 10% discount. Because imagine going there with a family of 5 and then looking at that and going, if we can get 5% off all our tickets. That's going to make a huge difference. It could be the deciding factor. Especially if they had a good time at Wembley over the weekend, they'll think, well, let's come back and do it all again for England.
Yeah. There was something in the match programme, obviously, about the Wembley test, but not everybody buys the match programme, because the match programme costs £10 when you go to Wembley. So, I don't know how many people buy them, but clearly not everybody does. So, a separate leaflet just given out to everyone coming in would have been the thing as far as I was concerned, but sadly that didn't happen.
Yeah. All right, let's touch on the other two matches that took place. The 1895 Cup, we had York defeating Featherstone 5 points to 4 in a tryless match.
Amazing, yes, absolutely.
A really hard fought battle.
Absolutely amazing, and I've not seen that game in full yet, because I was at the trouble with playing 3 games in quick succession. I was at the press conference for the Challenge Cup final, and then in the mixed zone talking to players after the game. So I missed the first half of the 1895 Cup final, but then quite soon after that I had to leave to catch my train reservation back to Yorkshire, Jake. So unfortunately I missed it, and I've not seen. I'm hoping to be able to watch the whole game at some time this week. But I was amazed, actually. 5 points to 4. Just no tries in that game. Was that because the defences were great, or was it because the attacking players were very poor? But I was delighted for York. Commiserations to Featherstone, and we had the York chairman Clint Goodchild on the podcast a few months ago, and he came across very impressively, and I'm delighted for him. Congratulate Clint, because he's put a lot of effort and investment into the York club, and it's great to see them enjoying some success, I think. And I hope that result is reflected in higher attendances at York and generally more success. I mean, and I was really pleased for Mark Applegarth, the York coach, because Mark coached Wakefield a couple of years ago when they had that terrible year in Super League, when they were, before Matthew Ellis had come on board to buy the club. Mark Applegarth had to compete in Super League with one hand tied behind his back, effectively, and they were relegated. And Mark obviously was given his marching orders from the club. Whether that was fair or not is open to debate. But I'm so delighted. He's such a lovely guy, is Mark, and I'm so delighted to see him bouncing back with that win. And I think I'm quite certain that Mark Applegarth has got what it takes to coach in Super League again, and it would be great to see that with York, wouldn't it? Hopefully, in the fullness of time. So, yeah, I was really pleased for them and for that club. Obviously sorry for Featherstone, because it's another club that I like and admire, but it was York's day, or only just. It was amazing, as I say, to get that to get that score in I think it was in golden point time, wasn't it? So
yeah, Liam Harris drop goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was his golden point was starting to wind down as well. I think there might have only been 10 seconds left on the clock. So ice in his veins to nail that kick. And looked like it was pretty wet and rainy.
Well, it was horrible. I mean, the weather was horrible all day. You only. It's funny that when you were there at the ground, you could see it was raining, but you only saw the extent of it, I think, when you actually saw it on a TV screen afterwards. Because, of course, we were sitting in the dry. Everybody, I mean, it's a great stadium, Wembley, and I think very few people in the crowd would have had any rain falling on them because of the way the stands are configured. So, but the players had to do it in atrocious conditions, and I think that's perhaps why there were quite a lot of errors from both sides, occasional errors, and But as I say, I don't think the bad weather detracted from the spectacle at all. Really, it was just a wonderful game, and I think everybody who was there felt that. Even the Warrington fans probably, thought that they'd got value for money from the game, even if they didn't get the result they wanted.
No, absolutely, mate. And it was nice seeing those scenes as well. All the players off the bench and the coaches running onto the field to celebrate. You always hope that one day you can experience watching your team go through something like that.
Absolutely.
But the other matchup we had, mate, the women's, Wigan 42 defeating St Helens 6. What a scoreline.
Gosh, yes. What a result for Wigan. Absolutely amazing. And Wigan have unveiled... Wigan have been building up their women's side for quite a long time, and this is where it's all come to fruition. And you have to congratulate them. They've got some real young star players in the world of women's rugby league. Their halfback combination, their fullback Grace Banks, halfback combination young Jenna Fubister and Isabel Rowe were outstanding. Their forwards took the game by the scruff of the neck. And St Helens had won the last 4 Women's Challenge Cup finals. So, obviously runs like that always come to an end eventually. But Wigan absolutely put their old rivals to the sword. And the St Helens players, I think, were devastated afterwards. I was interested to see at the end when they went up to the Royal Box, they were all being consoled by the St Helens chairman, Eamon McManus, giving them all a personal hug and, as I say, condolences for the defeat. But Wigan, Dennis Betts has put together a tremendous side, and they'll go on from here. And I think, with some of those Wigan players hopefully playing for England in future, we might get a bit nearer to the Gillaroos than we were in Las Vegas earlier this year. So, Women's Rugby League looked great, at least from Wigan's point of view on Saturday. It was a terrific win, and hearty congratulations to them. And they had quite a few... both sides had quite a few supporters in the stadium as well. It was interesting to hear, the 2 sets of supporters backing their teams, and but it was the Wigan fans who were obviously smiling at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And the more competitive teams we can get in the Women's Super League, as you said, it's a roll-on effect into the national team, isn't it?
Yes, we need at least 8. There are 8 teams in the Women's Super League, and we need them all to be competitive, Jake. And at the moment, you've probably got four teams that are really competitive, but we need to get some of the others up to scratch as well.
No, definitely, mate. All right, mate, let's touch on... We've already touched on a lot of what you've spoken about in your column this week, but the other thing you wrote about, mate, what could have been of the PSG team, mate. What did you have to say about that in your column this week?
Well, like a lot of people, I saw the highlights of Paris Saint-Germain beating Inter Milan in the UEFA Champions League final. And that was a brilliant performance by Paris Saint-Germain. And it just sort of made me think about the fact that back in 1996, when Super League launched, we were given the right to have a team in Paris, and we were able to use the Paris Saint-Germain name, which is the biggest sporting name in France by a long way. And we blew it. We that team operated for 2 seasons, and it didn't operate effectively, and was eventually closed down. And that was absolutely tragic, in my view. And if we managed to create a situation where that team could have been adequately funded, properly resourced, had adequate staff, both marketing and coaching and so on, it could have been an incredible success story, and should have been an incredible success story. and we could have had the Paris Saint-Germain team, if it had still been playing today, perhaps achieving in Super League what its football team has achieved in football. And yet, all we can do now is look back on it as the most incredible missed opportunity. And it's absolutely tragic as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's certainly a missed opportunity, and one that's probably going to haunt us every time we look back at it.
Absolutely, yeah. And and yet we've still got people who in rugby league in England who are convinced that the French experiment shouldn't be continued with, and absolutely crazy thinking in my view. I would love to think that the current owners of Paris Saint-Germain, who are actually Qatari, would be interested in reviving the rugby league club, but I'm sure they're not. But we need to find, it would be marvellous to get a team back in Paris, ultimately, and back playing at the highest possible level in rugby league.
Yeah, it'd be a great weekend away, mate. Now, some other news around, I guess, international rugby league. Mal Meninga, official. He's going to be the Perth Bears' inaugural head coach, which means Australia have to find a new coach. First of all, what did you make of the Mal signing? And second of all, who do you think will take over for him?
Well, I think Mal is a massive name. Obviously, one of the all-time greats of Australian rugby league. Hasn't coached at NRL level since the early 2000s when he was at Canberra. So I think he will need at least 2 or 3 other coaches working alongside him who are obviously younger and do some of the on-field preparation with the new Perth team. But certainly he will, as being such a big name, he will probably attract players to play for Perth in a way that probably few other coaches could have done. And I hope that works well for them, because they're going to have to start working out in the immediate future which players they want to acquire for that new club. Who's going to take over as coach of Australia? Well, maybe it'll be one of the 2 State of Origin coaches. Who knows, Laurie Daly or Billy Slater, whoever wins the State of Origin this year. Obviously, Laurie Daly looks to be the favourite at the moment, but who knows what might happen in Perth a week tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see, won't it? And we'll I think it's going to be an absolutely fascinating decision when it's ultimately made, to see who does take charge of the Aussies. I can't see it really affecting Australia's performance when they come to England all that much. And I'd love to think it would disrupt their preparation for the Ashes series, but I think I'm hoping for a bit too much there, Jake.
I will say that'd be a great way of deciding who is the coach every year. Just whatever coach wins State of Origin gets to coach the Australian team.
It would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's my suggestion to the NRL, and if they take it up, I'll gladly take some commission on that idea.
Oh, absolutely, mate. No, that's I think Kevy Walters, his name's been mentioned, but yeah, it could be. And there's so many coaches.
Matt Fitzler, he's been mentioned as well.
That's right. Yeah. So I think either of those 2 would be great. But you've only got to coach for a couple of months every year, right? And you're coaching superstars.
It's a cushy job in many ways.
Yeah, you and I can put our hat in the ring for it.
Until we actually get the international season sorted out with more games, then it'll become a bit harder.
No, definitely. Now, mate, Challenge Cup final for next year. The date's been announced. It's going to be held on the 30th of May, I believe.
Yes, I think it should be much later in the season. I just think it's ridiculous having it so early in the season. I've nailed my colours to the mast several times, and it was moved early in the season after in accordance with a suggestion by IMG, but I don't think they understand the nature and the ethos of the Challenge Cup, to be honest, by playing it at this time of the year. And I think it needs to be introduced into the season roughly 2/3 of the way through the season. And if it were, it would give a lot of clubs a chance to have a go at a second trophy when they've lost interest effectively in winning the Super League title. So, that's the function that the Challenge Cup should perform, in my view. And its status would be seen as being greater if it were played later in the year.
The other news, mate, Christian Wade, he debuted for Wigan, the Wigan reserves team over the weekend. Do you think he'll get picked to play this weekend?
Well, I wouldn't be at all surprised. I'm just seeing who Wigan play this weekend. It's they actually play at Huddersfield, so
yeah, Huddersfield.
They may not be expecting the greatest challenge from Huddersfield. Who knows? But I wouldn't be surprised if Christian Wade played, because Abbas Miski is still missing with injury, so they've got that vacancy on the wing. But in the last game, Jacob Douglas played on the wing for them, the young winger, and scored 3 tries. So it would be a bit hard on him to leave him out of the side on the back of scoring a hat-trick of tries. What I wouldn't be too surprised if Matty Peet, what Matty Peet could potentially do, and I don't know whether he'll do this, but he could put Christian Wade on the bench and bring him on at some time, perhaps at the start of the second half or whatever, to give him a decent run out, hopefully by the time that Wigan have established their control of the game, which you would expect them to do. So that's what I wouldn't be surprised if Matty Peet did, but then again, it's not my decision. So whether he'll do that or do something else, I'm not quite so sure.
Now, mate, the other news, Pearce Paul, he's signed with the West Tigers until 2028, effective from next year. What do you make of this signing?
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? Another English player who's leaving Newcastle after Will Price left them earlier this season. I think Pearce Paul has adapted really well to the NRL, and is the sort of player who I think Benji Marshall will really like. Well, obviously he must do, because he's signed him, but he's got a great offloading game, and I think you'll find that he'll be encouraged to use that under Benji Marshall's coaching. And I think West Tigers are a team that's definitely on the rise. They had a very narrow loss to Penrith at the weekend, Jake, and although they were disappointed to lose, they didn't lose particularly badly, only by 4 points, I think the margin was in the end. And I think Benji, who had a difficult first year or two as the West Tigers coach, is now really improving the side, and I think they've got a great future personally, and they are my favourite Sydney club, by the way. So I'm very much a fan of Benji Marshall, always have been from when he played at West Tigers, and I really hope that he manages ultimately to get the West Tigers back to winning the NRL one day in the not too distant future.
Now, they've made some smart signings, the Tigers, over the last couple of years, so
Jerome Luai being the obvious one, yeah. Although they've lost Lachlan Galvin, and he made his debut for Canterbury and scored a try, didn't he, against Parramatta on Monday, in front of nearly 60,000 people at Accor Stadium, by the way.
Yeah, that was great to see, and yeah, I mean, there's also talk with the Tigers at the moment that they might be signing Taylor May. So the brother of Terrell.
I think is a very
not Taylor. Well. Sorry, yeah, Taylor May. Yeah, I'm
getting
Taylor.
Mixed up
now.
Taylor, ex-Penrith player. Yeah.
Yep. So things are looking up for Benji in the future, and yeah, I think it was a tight match against Penrith. But yeah, we'll see how they go. The other thing I want to touch on, mate, I read today, Billy Boston, he's set to become the first Knight for rugby league?
Yes, he is. Yes, apparently he is to receive a knighthood. I'd not seen that before we started this podcast, which is bad for me, I think. But it looks as though Billy, at the age of 90, is finally going to be the first ever rugby league knight, and is going to receive it today. It's Tuesday today, of course, and he will receive that at Buckingham Palace today, which is amazing. And he's been an amazing man throughout his life, one of the greatest rugby league players of all time, of course. I think the second highest try scorer in the history of the game after Brian Bevan. And I mean, nobody could possibly deserve a knighthood more than Sir Billy, and I'm very glad that we're going to now start calling him Sir Billy. Or will it be Sir William? I suppose formally it will be Sir William, won't it? But it will be. I think all the Wigan supporters, it will be Sir Billy Boston, and let's hope that we've got him for many more years.
Yeah, I think for you guys that news must have broke overnight. It was just something I saw pop up before we hit record. But yeah, great to see you, mate, and long overdue for the rugby league community, right?
Yes. Yeah. I'd love to know who was behind making that decision, but it's been great to see that he's been nominated, and the nomination has clearly been accepted, and it's, our congratulations go to Billy and to everybody in his family. I mean, he's got a great family support network in Wigan as Billy, and I mean, Wigan. It made Wigan his home many years ago in the mid 1950s when he came north from Cardiff, and he's been an absolute credit to Wigan and to rugby league and to Wales. He's one of the players now who's got the statue in Tiger Bay in Cardiff, and it's just a remarkable. He's just a remarkable man. The funny thing is, when I was a kid, I doubt whether I would have said that, because of course I was a Wakefield supporter, and Billy was a great player for Wigan. And there's nothing I used to hate more than seeing him score tries against Wakefield, Jake. But all these years later, I've finally forgiven him. So, he's a wonderful man, and just an extraordinarily humble man as well. I mean, the last person in the world who will have, ever thought that he would get a knighthood would be Billy himself, I'm fairly sure. So, but what an astonishing guy.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, congratulations to him and his family. I'm sure they're very proud. It's great news. Just quickly before we get into this weekend's matchups, mate, Cam Munster, he's named as the new Queensland captain following Daly Cherry-Evans axing for Game 2. Came as a little bit of a surprise to some fans, but well earned and well deserved.
I'm not sure that I would have dropped Daly Cherry-Evans, but obviously Billy Slater has made that decision, and it was telegraphed quite a bit before the decision was actually made. Phil Gould is another person who has criticised the decision, but at the end of the day, Tom Dearden, I think, is a really terrific player, and he will step into Daly's shoes, as the starting halfback. And it's like anything else. It's all a case of whether the decision is justified or not will be shown by the result of the game in Perth in just over a week's time. If Queensland win, it will be a great decision. If Queensland don't win, then the decision will be open to question again. And I mean, I'm a Queensland fan, so I hope Queensland do win, and I hope Tom Dearden has an absolute stormer of a game. But we'll talk about that more next week, I guess.
Is there anything else you want to touch on before we get into this weekend's matchups, Martyn?
No, I don't think so. Just one final, actually, there is one point. I have done a review in this week's League Express of a new book written by Tony Collins, the sports historian. about the great Roy Francis, the great. It's interesting that we've talked about Billy Boston as one black Welshman. Well, another great black Welshman was Roy Francis, who was not only a great player in the 1930s and 40s, but also a brilliant coach. And he made a name for himself with Hull, led them to the championship in 1956, and actually won it again in 1958, and then took Hull to 2 Challenge Cup finals, and then coached Leeds and ultimately coached North Sydney. But a great coach, and it's a book well worth reading. I'd just give that a plug. It's called Roy Francis, Rugby's Forgotten Black Leader, and it's available now in bookshops and obviously on websites such as Amazon. And it's a great read, and Tony Collins has done a really sterling job in unearthing a fascinating personal story of Roy Francis. So I'd recommend everybody watching this podcast to try and get hold of a copy and read that book.
Yeah, a good early Christmas present, perhaps, mate.
I'd have thought so. Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get on to this week's games.
Yeah, mate. So Friday night, we've got Hull KR taking on Catalans.
Well, you would think that this would be a shoe-in for Hull KR, given Catalan's recent form. But Benjamin Garcia, I think he might be back for the Catalans, the Catalans captain. And if he is, I think the game could be more difficult for Hull KR than they might perhaps imagine, because, of course, it's always difficult when you've just won the Cup. Another reason why the Challenge Cup should be at the end of the season, not the middle of it, is because you don't get much time to celebrate if you win it. And the Hull KR players will have been celebrating this week, and it will be difficult for them to bounce back, to get into the zone, so to speak, to take on the Catalans this Friday night. The fortunate thing for them is that the Catalans have been playing badly. I think they will give a run out to one or two players who didn't get into the matchday squad for the Challenge Cup final. Aribi Doro, who I've got a really strong admiration for. I thought he played outstandingly well against St Helens. He was the 18th man at Wembley, and I think he'll definitely be in the side to play the Catalans on Friday night. So I think Hull KR will win, but not by a massive margin, probably by 6 points or so.
Okay. And the other matchup, we have Hull FC taking on Castleford.
Can you think of anything dafter than Hull and Hull KR both playing a home game on the same night, kicking off at the same time in the city of Hull? I mean, who on earth is responsible for fixture planning, Jake? I just can't believe it. Hull are playing extremely well. They hammered the Catalans in their last game in Perpignan, and I'm afraid I can only see one result here as Hull continue to climb up the Super League table. They're currently in 5th, Castleford are in 10th, and I think there's only one result, probably a 20-point victory for them on Friday night.
Yeah. Moving on to Saturday's matchups, we have Huddersfield taking on Wigan.
Well, again, only one result you can see here, but the interest in this game, as we were saying earlier, was whether how Matty Peake will select his Wigan side, whether there is going to be some switching around or not, and we'll see. But I can only see one result. Wigan will have had a week off, and I think they'll be far too strong for a Huddersfield team that did show strong signs of improvement in their last game. Having said that, they came back well against Lee, and they've got their first choice spine now in place. So maybe it won't be as easy for Wigan as we might think, but I still think they'd win by about 14 points.
Yep. Then we've got Leeds taking on Warrington.
Well, that's a fascinating one, isn't it? And Leeds are on a roll at the moment, and I can only imagine that will continue against Warrington. Warrington will be battling the disappointment of Wembley, but sometimes, if you look back at the historical record, sometimes you find that the team that lost at Wembley actually bounces back more effectively in the following game than the team that won at Wembley, because they won't have spent the whole week celebrating, of course. So maybe Warrington will be really highly motivated to come back and do a number on Leeds. I think it could be a really tight game. It's one of those, it could even go to golden point, in which case, if it did, watch out for Mark Sneed landing the field goal winner. So I'm tipping that as the game of the weekend.
Yeah. And then moving on to Sunday's matchups, mate, we have Wakefield taking on Leigh.
Well, another really great game. Two sides that are both battling for the top six. Wakefield is 7th, just outside the top six on points difference. Leigh are 3 places above them in 4th place. I actually think Wakefield might win this game, but it certainly won't be an easy game for them. And I think it could just be a very fine margin, 4 points either way, but with Wakefield just to grab the victory perhaps late on. But it should be a thriller, and I'll really look forward to it, Jake.
And the final matchup, mate, Salford versus St Helens.
By the way, that Wakefield League game is on the BBC, so that's worth bearing in mind. I think it's on the BBC website. I'm not sure that it's actually on BBC One or BBC Two. But anyway, Salford St Helens. Well, what do we think? Probably a 40-point margin for St Helens. This one, poor old Salford limping along, but still managing to put out a side, and badly wounded. And St Helens need to bounce back from that, significant Hull KR defeat just over a week ago. So there's only one result here that I can really imagine, and as I say, Saints to win by a significant margin.
Yeah, awesome, mate. All right, Martyn. Well, I'm happy to wrap it up here if you are, mate, and we can meet back next week and do it all again.
That's great.